Welcome to the Building Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Taujanskas, and join us as we explore the world of construction. Each episode, we welcome a guest that shares career highlights and career advice, and hopefully inspires the next generation of construction professionals. Welcome to another edition of the Building Your Career podcast. Today, I am joined by Chris O'Regan, the Associate Director at Mason Navarro Pledge, and we're going to talk about something that we've not talked about before, which is building safety and particularly the occupants of the buildings as well. Now, I do want to just put a little disclaimer in here at the moment that the views and opinions expressed by both of us in this podcast episode are ours and not our employers or any learned societies or trade bodies that we are members of. So our opinions are purely our own. So, Chris, I will give the floor to you. If you could take it away and give us a little bit of a brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Yes. Hello. Thanks for having me on this show, Dom. It's an honour. It really is. As I said, I'm Chris O'Regan. I'm an Associate Director at Mason Navarro Pledge, a civil and structural engineering consultancy, primarily based in Hitchin, but they also have offices in London and Manchester. So that's a little bit about me. I've been working in the field of structural engineering since 1987. It's a very long time. And I've seen lots of things change, come and go. One of my drivers has been to make sure that the knowledge that I've accrued over these decades is then shared to others when I retire, which isn't that far away. That's about 10, 15 years away. I'm acutely aware of that. And one of the things, I wrote all the technical guidance notes that you'll find at the iStructP website. Many people use them to this day. I wrote them about 10, 15 years ago now, but people are still using them, and they're just basically succinct 2 or 3 pages worth of not bullet point, but just guidance and how to do things, because I was never taught them. So that's where I'm at, and this led me to a place where I got involved with the Engineering Council and post the Grenfell Tower disaster that it was and fire that happened there, and this led me to talking to you now, Dom.
Awesome. So, I think you've touched on a crucial point there. Talking about building occupancy and building safety as well. I know you're kind of quite passionate and keen to go through the Tower Inquiry report. So could you kind of kickstart and give us a little bit of an overview of what your knowledge is of that?
Certainly. I am involved, as I say, with the Engineering Council on various bodies, not bodies, but sort of panels, I should say. And when the Phase 2 inquiry report of Grenfell Tower fire was released, I, along with many other panelists in the Engineering Council, read it all, not just the executive summary, all 1,400 pages of this huge tome describing and just going through all the problems and all the things that led to the disaster. And it's a very, very difficult read, not in terms of volume, that's stupid, but I'm talking about in terms of accepting people's failures and also recognizing behaviors of others in yourself. And that's what I want to really focus on, and to this limited time we have on this podcast, is behaviors, and we need to stand up to them and recognize them. And when we recognize that they're happening or we're doing it, we can do things to stop them from spiraling, because they do. So that's the key lesson I personally learned from reading the Phase 2 report, the inquiry report of Grenfell Tower fire, was human behaviour. Which sounds odd, but you'd think that I'm more focused on technical, how did the fire occur and that kind of thing, which is all very, very important. But really, when it boils down to it, is how people behave prior to the fire and how people behaved after the fire occurred is a lesson that we should all take away from and learn from. In my opinion, within the built environment industry, we need to recognize these behaviors and put a stop to them, or do things to counter them or mitigate their effects.
Okay, so Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by human behaviour? Is this on an individual level? Is this on a construction as a whole in a wider context level? Can you kind of...
No, it's an individual thing, I'm afraid, and it's a common failure. Technical engineers and people working in the science and engineering fields do this all the time. This thing, I keep on talking about in abstract, I'm going to zero in the detail now, Dom, so here we go. The problem is that you make an assumption, or you remember a parameter of a thing, and you say, or you remember a behaviour, or it is an expected behaviour of a material, okay? When it interacts with a thing, whether it be fire, whether it be wind, whether it be cold, whether it be all sorts of things. You just know how it's going to behave because you remember reading about it. There's this test done. You just know the behavior of this material and you're 100% sure that, well, you convince yourself you're 100% sure that this is true without any back checking on it to be really true. And that's what happened multiple times on the Grenfell Tower. There was fire occurred before, many fires, 2 or 3 fires actually occurred before. It's exactly the same, exact same material, everything. We knew this phenomena was going to occur. It's a known thing. It happens to this material. The woods and the details here, but basically some very prominent people, experts in facade and cladding, made assumptions about how this material would behave, which were profoundly wrong. And the thing is, they would double down on this assumption, saying, no, this is how it is. This is how I understand it to be. What we should be doing as experts is knowing that we're humans and we get things wrong. And that's okay. You know, I've been doing this for 30 plus years now, and I still, of course I do, I may be very experienced, very qualified in what I do, but I recognize the fact that I have my own failings. Why do you think I, as many competent structural engineers would know, is that any design you output or oversee or what have you, you make sure it's peer reviewed before anyone outside the practice gets to see it. Why? Because there's a high risk, there's a very distinct possibility that you will get something wrong. You'll miss something fundamental, potentially, or maybe not, but you may miss something you haven't considered. And therefore, to overcome that is you actually have other eyes, other people in your peer group look at it, hence the phrase peer review, to make sure what's being produced is fun, is sound. We need to do this as a matter of course. We need to challenge not only our own assumptions, but the assumptions of others. And any assertions made, anything you say, is that true? Can you back it up with actual data to demonstrate that what you've asserted is true? And then unless you have some backup data to demonstrate that the claims you're making and the assertions you're making are actually correct and factually correct, then they're not, are they? They're baseless. And there's lots of emotions going on. There's lots of ego. Ego is a big problem. Especially in engineering, but ego is a big problem. I've encountered it many, many, many times in my career. That people would take an opinion on something without actually basing it on really what's going on. They're just saying, I don't like this. There's a phrase, like emotions. Therefore, I'm not going to actually endorse it. And I've encountered this many times in my career. And there's a gold medal address done a couple of years ago at the IST, where this brilliant engineer faced constant pushback against his ideas and concepts. They're all perfectly technically sound, but people wouldn't accept them because they didn't like them. And we need to be, I'm not asking us to be robots, that's absurd, but I want us to be scientists and engineers because that's what we're employed to do. That's what we expect. They want us to think this way, cause and effect, understand that what's the cause, what will the effect will happen, and don't assume the effect is based on some half memory or half misunderstood system that you thought is true. In terms of Grenfell Tower, it was about how fire spreads along cladding. They thought they knew, but they didn't. And they made an assumption there. Again, it's a little bit more detail. I will encourage, and indeed any listener, a person who's listening to this who works in the built environment industry, in any senior capacity, stress that word senior. So if you're a decision maker, a driver, a director of some sort, I strongly, strongly recommend you spend time reading this report. It's just a lot to do, and it's a lot of time. But honestly, you come out better for it.
And that's fascinating. And I'm really glad you mentioned the word ego there, because as soon as you talk about human behavior, you have to talk about human psychology as well. And, I do think the ego side of things is an issue in the industry, and people being closed-minded and thinking that they kind of know everything. In your opinion, would you say that's a kind of a generational thing? Would you say that that's people who have historically been in the industry for a long time, and the newer generation are much more open to peer reviews, or do you still find that there is those problems even with the younger generation coming through?
No, it's always existed throughout in history. This is not a generational thing. This is a human condition thing. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a backseat, backseat psychologist or sofa psychologist, if you like. But I'm a human being, and I know how people interact with things, and I have empathy. And that's one of the things that drives me personally is empathy. More people should do that, by the way, because that makes life a lot easier. When you start putting yourself in other people's shoes, go, how would they like it, or how would you like it? And that's one of the reasons I make sure that what I design is safe, because I like to think I work in the building. I'm sitting here in the building now that I assume is safe to use. Is that too much to ask? So, no, this has been around since before the pyramids, my friend. You looked at a cave and go, well, is this safe, or is it buried in a bit? Probably not safe right now, no. So so this, no, I'm not going to I think it's since Homo sapiens have been around, they've had some kind of function of having to make sure someone's done something safe. No, this is really coming about as a result of, and this again, I was expressing my own opinion on this amount of observations related to the earlier statement, it's about financial problems or demands. What I'm finding, and this is something that was a warning shot that was maybe 10, 15 years ago. President of the IStruct, Ian Firth, address was, he was a bridge engineer, he is a bridge engineer, and he stated that what's happening is that fees and professional fees and actual value, the recognised value of construction or built environment professionals is being challenged significantly, and has been and will continue to be, unfortunately, to the point where money is not really available, or money is not being, resources cannot be, appropriate level of resources not being applied to the checking and reviewing of documentation that's being produced. So because all the work and all the effort's been spent in producing it in the first place. So the programs, the design programs and construction programs, the point of review, of checking, is being squeezed to the point of almost non-existence, which is hiding to nothing. We can't carry on like that, and we have been, and it's not getting any better. Grenfell Tower was also a symptom of that culture, of not, we say all the right words, we say all the right things. Oh yeah, everything we produce is, every sketch, every, email is, every sentence is checked by another. Of course it isn't. That's absurd. But what we should be doing is infusing into our design outputs, and an effort spent and time spent is reviewing and checking designs that we produce that are fundamental, that people are relying upon. Because at the moment, what's happening is that is either no peer reviews done at all, or when they're done, they're not robust enough. And then they have all these near misses happening on sites across the UK and indeed many parts of the world. But we're going to focus on the UK because that's personally my own experience. And these near misses are just having to be repaired. And it's much more difficult to do something and repair something after it's done, rather than actually avoiding it in the first place. And this is an endemic problem, and it's really anchored around, I'm afraid, and this is very cynical, that you come across as someone who's a certain point of view in terms of financing and the concept of capitalism. It's not really about that. It's talking about understanding the value add that built environment experts and specialists provide to the design and development of buildings or the built environment, and that needs to change. Now, the government is going to be, and now it's led to this inquiry, led to this issue of having to justify with the confidence in the built environment industry is fallen through the floor because of this since Grenfell, because there's just no sense of you seem to care about you just seem to throw these buildings up without proper due care and attention, despite all the regulations that were in place, relied on the fact that it assumes that what we have is raft of mountainous regulations, huge amounts of regulations upon regulations. Why on earth didn't they work? Well, how could it fail? It was foolproof. Clearly, it wasn't.
And for you then, I know changes in the industry clearly need to happen, and there needs to be a lot done to happen. So how is the industry going to respond to the recommendations in the report then?
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? And there's a whole raft of recommendations. Now, what's really interesting is that, we've been talking about, we said from the outset on this podcast, we were talking about building safety, and I haven't mentioned the Building Safety Act until now. So this is a thing that's been around since 2019. Believe it or not, it was enacted, it became in law 2022. So the Building Safety Act is very much in effect. And that's one way the government has worked with the industry to a point to create this new way of working, new way of designing buildings. And so, but the thing is, that was done before the release of this report. And indeed, the report, the inquiry, Phase 2 inquiry report, does reference the Building Safety Act and recognises the changes that it's infusing and encouraging. But it says, it asserts, and this is a very summary sort of statement, there's a lot more nuance what I'm about to say here, but ultimately says, that's great, but could you do more, please? And they want to do, and principally there's a focus on fire engineers especially, and there's also a huge focus on, significant focus on other specialists, namely structural engineers, which is what I am on top of. So one of the ways there's two ways it could go down. Again, this is my opinion, but there's two ways it's going to go. And I wanted to go one way, but it could go another. In England and Wales, specifically, there's no formal licensing of a structural engineer or indeed a fire engineer. All the professional engineering institutions, also known as PEIs, sorry for the acronyms, but acronyms make things shorter, but professional engineering institutions. So I'm going to give examples of these. So, of course, there's the Institution of Structural Engineers, of which I'm a member. And there's the Institution of Civil Engineers, also a member of that, and the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and so on and so forth. These, many people think they are trade bodies, but they're not. They are learned societies. They've always been that way. That's been their remit. And their remit's expanded over the years to include the idea of maintaining excellence and technical competence and understanding and giving some sort of measure to the outside world, or to those who are not part of those institutions, that their membership act in a certain way and have a certain level of competence in the particular field that they cover. Great. And that's been going on for over 100 years. These, or maybe more in some cases, maybe 150 years of these learned societies measuring or granting, and those members acting under a code of conduct. And this code of conduct requires them to act in a certain way. And if they don't, then they could be disbarred and thrown out and expelled from the institutions. And that's been going on for 100 years, as I've already said. But the problem is that anyone could be an engineer. You don't have to be a member of these PEIs at all to practice as an engineer. You don't even need a formal qualification at all in England and Wales. I can focus on that because Scotland's a different beast. Let's relate to that in a moment. Because Scotland and Jersey are two different places that have a different system. So what is the intention is that one way to go around it to counter the issues or to address the recommendations made by the Phase 2 report, the inquiry report, is to demonstrate competence more than what's currently done. There has to be a formal process that declares that the people that they're being commissioned and employed by lay folk, for want of a better phrase, in other words, what is known as duty holders in the Building Safety Act, those basically building owners, developers, the employers, those who commission experts, they are commissioning people who know what they're doing, who are suitably competent in the particular thing that you're asking them to do. Okay? Who naturally, some would argue, well, the best people to do that are the ones who've been doing it for 100 plus years in the first place without any formal. So they're saying, well, okay, well, I need to employ people who are chartered engineers, called a chartered engineer or an incorporated engineer who has suitable competencies relating to the thing I want to build. All right. And the PEIs are stepping up. They're creating a competency register for various disciplines, fire engineers, and structural engineers. They're the two institutions that are stepping up and going, we're making a register. We're doing this. We're making a register of competent structural engineers that are capable of working on higher risk buildings. So that answers that question. I want to employ someone who's competent to do a certain thing. And that's great. And that's what PEIs are stepping up to. But then there's the other route. It's unlikely this will occur, but I just want to talk about it because, talking between ourselves, Dom and I, and we're talking to a wide audience. So let's have this debate now. And it's good to have it because I'm hoping we're going to get some interesting feedback from this show. So what's the other route then, Chris? Well, what I just described to you about PEIs and learner societies and what have you, it's kind of unique to UK. That's a history thing. It's to do with the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment period and where all that sort of societies grew out of people going to coffee shops, what have you. That's what it grew from. It's an organic thing. It was a reaction to all these sudden bursts of energy and industry and innovation. They needed to come together to have these ideas and talk openly and honestly about these really what was seemingly impossible concepts made reality. These gatherings, these groups of people was born from that place. Whether you like it or not, that's where it came from. So what do other countries do? They didn't have that history. They didn't have that, so much. Well, indeed, they didn't have that culture, I should say. I'm just describing it. I'm not praising it anyway. I'm not giving it any sense of value from one to the other. I'm just describing it. Please, listener, understand that. I'm not praising necessarily. I'm just describing the culture that the United Kingdom and indeed most of Northwest Europe and North America experienced in this time during the early 80s. So from that, created societies. So what was the other route? Well, the other route is licensing and registration by an independent government-run agency. So this government-funded and run agency, i.e. civil servants, will then deem to regard you as a licensed practitioner in this particular field. And you have to prove to them your competence to actually work in that licensed field, and you will sign up to them. You will pay them an annual fee to recognize that you are competent in this field because you are a licensed engineer as defined by someone who doesn't even work or has anything to do with your particular profession.
Right.
They are civil servants. They're licensing. So that's how most of the world deals with professions like me. You go to United States, especially Germany, China, all these places, they have that system. And you may think, well, that sounds good, like an independent idea, and this is something we can discuss. The problem is that the value, that all the competence issues and the excellence and technical excellence is then bled away from the learned societies into this licensing. And what you'll find is that if this becomes a thing that we have in UK, England and Wales, I'll talk about Scotland in a moment, is that then all of a sudden the impetus or the importance of the PEIs starts to fade. And if it starts to fade, people aren't going to sign up and do the 7-hour exam to become a chartered structural engineer, which I did 20 odd years ago now, 25 years ago, crikey. Do that exam. Why go for that hurdle when all I have to do is the licensing, which is a different. I wouldn't have that. So it just. I mean, the architects always suffer from this anyway. Rebirths, the membership Rebirth is way down because they don't need to be, but in order to practice, they need to be registered as a licensed architect. That's a different body. It's a government body.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that because I've been thinking about the difference between the RIBA and the ARB because I studied architecture, worked in architecture for a number of years. So
you can understand greater than I because I can only work in circles of PEIs.
Yeah, completely. And it's very interesting you should mention the different ways that different companies do it. And I suppose, I know we've talked quite a lot about competency there. So what would be, in your opinion, the kind of the key metrics to be able to measure competency?
Well, they already exist. Of course they do. They've already been captured. They've been described and they've been formulated. The Engineering Council has something called UK Spec. Dreadful phrase. Doesn't mean a lot. But it's basically a foundational document that describes the competency of a person working as an expert, typically an engineering council, so it would be an engineer in the built environment industry. I say built environment industry, it probably sounds, maybe some listeners not familiar with it. I don't use the word construction industry because that implies the construction of anything. So it could be marine biology, marine sort of architecture, for example. Not that I have any, disrespect at all to shipbuilders, far from it. Amazing things. But that's not what I do. So I'm focusing on a built environment. That's why I keep on using that phrase. So the Engineering Council is definitely focused, certainly in my experience, with those specialists. And they've defined with a series of sort of key objectives, they call them, or key sort of parameters. And they've filed them under various categories. And these categories, then every chartered engineer, regardless of discipline in many regards, has to abide by, has to demonstrate that they can do these things. And principally, the anchor around which a chartered engineer, and I'll talk about others as well, but let's focus on chartered engineer because I've been one for the last 20 odd years. Chartered engineer is ultimately a decision maker, and also they're a leader. But they really are the ones that make decisions based on the expertise and knowledge that they have. And also they recognise their own level of competence as well. Use the word competence word too much, but they understand what they know, what they don't know. That's a better way of putting it. And because they understand what they know, what they don't know, and then they make decisions and they back up those decisions by facts and they stand by those decisions. That makes them a chartered engineer. There's much more to it, much more, but that's at its core what a chartered engineer does, or is expected to do. And it's all those competencies already exist. It's been around for decades, longer than that. Maybe it's been understood and described in written form. It's just not that well known or publicly understood.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating what you're saying there. And it's certainly opened my eyes to different kind of ways of thinking as well, and not just assuming that the way that we do it is necessarily the best way. There's always room for change and improvement. So that was absolutely fascinating what you were saying there. I know in the kind of preparation before this podcast, you wanted to highlight the kind of Ronan Point disaster and kind of the comparisons to Grenfell Tower as well. Obviously, Grenfell Tower would be in a lot of people's minds being a very recent event, but could you kind of just give us a little bit of an overview of the Ronan Point disaster and what the comparisons are between the two then?
Absolutely. So this is something sort of a virtual green room, everyone, that Dom and I had discussions about what the content of this show would be. And one of the things I wanted to raise was that there was an event that occurred in 1968 called Ronan Point. It was a building that was built soon after the war, the Second World War, I should say. And this was a residential building, multi-story residential building made out of precast concrete panels and all roughly tied together, but not particularly well together. Most lathe folk, if you said to someone out there, if you did a Vox Pox as they used to do, and asked them, what do you know about Ronan Point? Most people wouldn't know, no idea what you're talking about. However, if you talk to someone, a specialist or expert in the built environment industry, they would go pale. They don't like to talk about it because it's horrific what happened, but again, it's not in the public zeitgeist. It's not really well known. But what is it then? Let's talk about this. So let's assume the listener, anyone could be listening to the show, so let's assume they don't know what it is. Well, as I said, it's a building. It's constructed soon after war, and it suffered an explosion. An explosion occurred that led to not only it was a gas explosion. It's a sort of there's a boiling a kettle. There's a stove, and it all basically exploded in this small apartment, this small flat. And then this led to a collapse not only of the flat and the course, but also many floors below it. Many floors. In fact, a good quarter of the building was destroyed as a result of this basically a cascade event. And it led to the phrase and the adoption of the phrase disproportionate collapse. An event occurred that was relatively small, but then the effect of it was disproportionate to the cause. And this is the fundamental failing of a design. If you have a structure that will collapse due to a small thing, so for example, you have an entire building leaning on a small sort of matchstick or small column or something, and then you take the column away and then the whole building collapses, clearly that's disproportionate to the cause. So disproportionate collapse became part of the lexicon of structural engineers, not only in the UK, but the worldwide, because this affected everyone. Because suddenly we're building buildings that were very, very large, but could also be affected by this phenomena, this disproportionate collapse phenomena. So why am I equating Ronan Point, which was a horrific disaster, many deaths, and it led to, why am I citing that and comparing it, indeed, to Grenfell? Most insulting. It's not, because it changed everything to do structural engineering. It didn't really affect that many other disciplines to a point. It did and it didn't. But ultimately, it was really look to the structural engineer to go, please don't design buildings that suffer from this phenomena. If you do, you're actually making an unstable building, which strictly is true. If you're design a building, a structure engineer, and you don't take into account disproportionate collapse, and you've failed in some way, or there's a component that would suffer from this plight, then you actually haven't designed the safe building, period. That's enshrined in the building regulations. Now, I'm not talking about approved documents, that's different. That's enshrined in the building regulations. The building regulations require structural engineers, not a correction, they just require the design of the buildings. Whoever does it, it's not relevant, they don't really care, but the regulations clearly don't care. They just want to show that it won't suffer from this, it won't be a disproportionate collapse. It was a huge sea change in the field of structural engineering. And I think that this Grenfell is going to have a similar cascade effect. But rather than just one particular discipline, which is structural engineers, it's going to affect everyone. And only over the last 6-7 months, people have started waking up to this, because as with most things I've found in the built environment industry, the people who know about things more first and in greater detail are those who are investing in it, i.e. developers. They've known way ahead of time what's coming, and they're directing the people they commissioned, like, you need to do this. Do I? That's basically the reaction they're getting. Oh, you need to do this Gateway 2 submission. Could you tell me how you're going to do that? I'm sorry, what? Well, the Gateway, and they start asking these very detailed questions, and I've received them over and over again. We're getting them because Mason Navarro Pledge, we do a lot of residential buildings, and we're getting lots and lots of queries saying, how are you going to do the Gateway 2? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? How are you going to do this? All these very detailed questions, clearly written by lawyers.
Yeah.
And it's always the same. When CDM came out, the lawyers and the developers, they were on it way earlier than everyone else. Why? Because they were the ones at risk.
Yes.
It's very cynical of me to say that, I'm sorry, but that's, again, going back to the very opening of this podcast, human behaviour.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that point as well. It's sometimes the risk
enables people to be able to think differently and almost champion and pioneer change within the industry. And yeah, you are completely right. The residential developers leading the way is only natural because it is about large buildings, it is about facades, it is about the factors that had to be taken into account. And, you know, hopefully we're at a point where it's not just being changed for the sake of it being changed, it's being changed because people actually genuinely want to make a difference and make things a lot safer in the built environment, rather than feel as though their hands forced, which I think maybe at the beginning of things people were a little bit resistant, but now I'm definitely seeing a complete difference in mindset shift, which goes back to our original point, is that whole human behavior thing as well. But I suppose just to kind of round this all out and close it out, then where do you see the future of this going then? Where do you think this is kind of ultimately going to lead?
I think I'm hoping, and I'm seeing signs of it already, and it's something I'm trying to personally actively encourage, is that I'd like to think that no, not like to think. That seems too optimistic and wishy-washy and baseless. I've observed. That's better. I've observed changes in behaviour, positive changes in behaviour. I've observed people coming together where normally there would be adversaries. Not adversaries, but basically barely talk to each other or acknowledge their existence at all. And what do I mean by that? It's all very abstract, but what do I mean by that? I'm not saying kumbaya, everyone sort of coming together and giving each other a hug. No. What I'm talking about is people taking responsibility for the design of buildings in a holistic manner. Now, there's an abused word. What I mean by holisticism or holistic manner is that it's connected. Everything is connected. Everything is dependent on each other. Let me give you an example of this. As a structural engineer, I will be beholden to the fire engineer to advise on us, other construction professionals built environment industry professionals, to work on a design to make sure that it doesn't be negative. It will survive, but the occupants will not become to harm in the event of a fire occurring within it that then leads to spreading the fire. And I do that by actually following this fire strategy report, following their advice. But by the same token, I have every right to challenge what's been said. It's interesting that it's okay for what I'm getting at is that while I am a structural engineer, my principal knowledge and understanding is focused on that very thing, on that very field. It doesn't prevent me from questioning or challenging or asking about another field. It doesn't mean I'm taking responsibility for that design. I'm simply acting as a design team member that says that, why have you actually done your containment, the M&E containment, for example, in this way? Can we not have it going down this fire corridor because then we've got to do all sorts of protections to that containment? Can't we just move it out to a place that's less sensitive? I'm not doing the containment, M&E containment planning. Of course I'm not, but I'm a member of the design team, and I'm not suggesting I'm designing it either, but I'm offering additional data to another specialist that would help. And that's how we should be doing things, and that's the future of it. Because the Building for a Safer Future, also known as the Hackett Report, which was released in 2018, I think, by Dame Judith Hackett, in the wake of the Grenfell Tower, she cited siloed thinking. People just only taking responsibility for the direct things they contributed to, and not taking responsibility for the design of the building as a whole. That has to stop. Ignorance is never a defense. Never a defense. And those who commission experts like myself and other experts, they don't know what we know. That's why we're commissioned in the first place. And they assume that we would act in that way. We would take responsibility, certainly for what we've done, but also take responsibility for the safety of the building and its occupants as a whole, not just the part we're responsible for. And that's the change.
Yeah.
And it's happening because it
Yeah.
has to. Now we've got legislation that's forcing us to demonstrate that we're doing an integrated process, that the design is integrated. And one of the things I've infused in my project is more iterative process, where even the most seemingly benign decision, you call up the architect or call up whoever and say, can we do this change? Can we do this? Can we optimize it like this? Will this work? Can we do it like this? I'd love to be more specific. Facades and cladding systems, for example, that can go under a lot of structural engineer will go, just tell me what you're putting up there and then I'll add it to my structural model. I don't really care. But no, we can actually help. We'll go, well, we can help not so much design the support systems, but say, well, if you do that support system, then my structure will behave in such a way and, explain all tolerances and why that sort of thing. Just really be more open and honest, knowing that no one is going to sue you for designing the air handling unit, for example, because I will specify the air handling unit. I have no idea how to specify one, but I know what it does, Tom. And I know why it's there. And I know, what a bus bar is, and I know why it's there and how it's distributed and why they're used. And I could go on and on. There's all sorts of the components of a building structure that I know about and what it does and what they do. And if I do, why am I just sitting there stum, not saying anything, when I know that what's being proposed isn't probably the optimum design?
I really like that. I really like that point. And I think, it is that kind of bigger picture thinking, really, and not just saying, well, that's not my responsibility, that's not my field, I have no input, or I have no cause to highlight things that I think may be wrong or things that I think may be able to be improved. So I absolutely love where you're coming from there. I think that's that more overview approach and maintaining a good level of communication with all disciplines and not just saying, I just do this and that's it.
Yeah,
I think is crucial for moving things forward.
It is. And I do a course on behalf of the Institution of Structural Engineers. It's a day-long course where I talk to other built environment industry professionals about structural engineering and just get them to think about it. They probably never thought about it in the same way I'm asking them to think about it. And everyone comes away very I'm not expecting any of those people to attend those courses to suddenly become structural engineers. No, that's absurd. In fact, I deliberately don't really focus on numbers because that always putting an equation up in front of a non-structural engineer is hiding to nothing. But by the same token, I do talk about things like, can you tell the difference between secondary and primary structure? Now, structural engineers know this all the time. It's like, oh yeah, that's that and it's this. It's the secondary structure is something that's sitting off primary structure. But if I explain that and get these people to think about that, then when they're sitting in design team meetings and someone pipes up and someone says, oh, I need a wind post design, and the structural engineer goes, well, I'm not doing it. Well, it's the structure, isn't it? No, it's not. It's not primary. Get someone else to do it. And it's the understanding all these things. It's more having some empathy. Remember I said earlier about empathy and being so powerful? If you have empathy to other disciplines, that's a step in the right direction because they realise that, you don't want to disrupt the containment system or the layout of the containment system or of the M&E too much to the point where it becomes impossible. Yeah, I think doing courses like that, talking to other in a more abstract and open or honest way is the way forward, and what is being encouraged, actively encouraged by those who work outside, who are looking in on us and going, why are you like this?
Yeah.
Because the aeronautics isn't like this. The automotive industry isn't like this. Chemical and petrochem isn't like this. Yet the building, which is one of the oldest industries in the world, is just like, well, I'll just do a little bit and I'm happy with that. And you just do these little siloed things. And indeed, if you look at the report, the Phase 2 inquiry report, that cites it as people going, wasn't me, Gov, it was the other three. And that's what they were saying. Wasn't me, it was the other three. It wasn't me, it was them, it was them, it was them. It's all everyone else, not us.
Well, Chris, this has genuinely been fascinating. I mean, that word doesn't even come close to how much I've enjoyed this episode. I've learned so much, and I think this is such an important topic that does need to be discussed. It does need to be debated. It does need to be talked about. So, needless to say, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your views on this one.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think it's an important thing. This is not going to end here. This has only been an hour conversation. This is a whole conference, everyone. And indeed, there has been conferences on this thing. I could talk about all sorts of aspects of this, but I just wanted to zero in on the concept of human behaviour and how that we need to recognise that. And all the other things said and done, that's all great. But really, what it boils down to is just humans being human. And we need to recognise that. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm a human being. The last time I checked, anyway, and I recognise the failings and what one should be doing, and what people maybe should stop doing.
Brilliant. Oh, I think Chris, well, thank you so much for being a guest. It's genuinely been one of my favourite episodes. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joining us on the Building Your Career podcast. We hope you enjoyed hearing from our guest and learning about the different career paths available. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe so we can reach even more listeners. And if anyone wants any free CV advice or simply wants to know the options available to them, don't hesitate to get in touch.